So we have a lot of things going on in the industry, and we had a little phone call from a gentleman who was basically the trainer of the best trotter ever. I got to meet him in 2009 at Balmoral. Greg, you there?
I sure am. Good morning, Eric. How are you?
Good morning. You tried calling me on Facebook a little bit after 5. It actually doesn't hit my phone, so I appreciate that. But it is now 6:45 in the morning on Friday, June 11th. I have the man, literally the trainer of the best trotter ever, who now has progeny all over the world. And, I mean, we had talked briefly yesterday. What was it at that one point where you said, I'm not going to geld this horse?
Well, put it this way, I never, ever thought of it, but for years I took no credit for him at all. As I said, there was a lot of media around him, and if you could find one time where I took any credit for him, I'll be shocked, being in that business. What I said is, and I said it the other day on YouTube to James Witherite over at the Gateway Baby Races, now that I really look back, he probably would have been gelded by every other outfit that had any interest, because he was turned down by so many that they would have looked at him and said, well, he toes out, he's got a roach back, now he wants to run off the track, he wants to go sideways, swish his tail all the time, so we had better looking, better bred in the barn, so we'll go ahead and geld him. Now, can you imagine what that would have meant to the industry if you took him and his sons and his grandsons and his daughters and took them out of the yearling sales for starters? Oh, well, what a wonderful world this would not be, I guess would be the song. Yeah, what a wonderful world it would not be. But I say it with humility. I really took pride in him, and I sent him to the stage about like George Jones, because I'm a big country music fan. When I sent him to the stage, the band was ready to play, and Brian Sears could just do what he had to do. And I also believed in the Tessio theory of the vibrancy of the stallion. When he went to the stallion barn, one of the theories of Tessio is they go with vibrancy, because when he had his last race at Mohawk, or, in the Breeders' Cup, I should say Woodbine, he about looked at me and says, this it? Is it over? Yeah, it's over. So, again, I'll say it and say it again. After all these years, I will say this. I did have an instrumental part in his success on and off the track.
So we have our format that we'd like to, follow with, but before we start, you corrected me yesterday. When I had my conversation with Robert Taylor, or Spence as he's known, in reference to Southern Rocket Top, I used the word freak, and you corrected me yesterday. Is he a gorilla? Like, what's the word for a horse like this? I mean...
No. Well, you wouldn't say he's a freak. I'll tell you he was a freak. And a lot of people don't know, I trained her back her last year the Great Peaceful Way. And right before she was ready to go, literally I get a call from Marvin Katz, and they say she's dying in the clinic. So goes the jealousy again. She came to me in really bad shape, and anyway, when she went back, she got picked up and went back to camp. She won her first race, and that was kind of the end. She would be a freak because she was very small and had a unconventional gait, if you will. So that would be what I would say would be a freak. And by the way, Southern Rocket Top has the distinction of being the closest ever to Muscle Hill, because he won by an average of 4 lengths, where with Southern Rocket Top he was at his wheel in Du Quoin, simply because Luke McCarthy told me if he just turned his hand to about what you'd call 315, and Muscle Hill just, marched off, and he just really didn't even let him go. So it's funny how you mentioned Southern Rocket Top, and I have very fond memories of that, because my uncle was on the Illinois Racing Board, Dr. Joseph G. Peck and Yadom as Jerry. And the last time I was at Du Quoin was in 1974, when Billy Houghton won his first Hamiltonian with Christopher T. So here it was 25 years later, and I win the last World Trotting Derby, and it was very interesting, because that was the Blagojevich days, and they were worried about what might happen, but we got paid, and everything really worked well. It was a lot of fun, and that's why I went there. And as you know, I went to Balmoral. I supplemented them to Balmoral because I wanted to go there. I didn't go to Harris, Philadelphia, and I love Rick Kane and Joe and everybody, down there is so, but I didn't think he should come back in 8 days after the Hamiltonian. So, going back to who else would have said, no, we're not going to, they called it Chester the day for $500,000. I don't know of anybody else who would have, even though they said they would. I don't think they would have. And we'll never know. But I think spacing his races, keeping him fresh, and going back to what I said, making sure when he goes to the stage, the band was ready to play.
So the question going back then, what do you call a horse like this? Just something special? I mean, I've heard of the word gorilla. I mean, what would you, a monster?
No, and I wouldn't even say that, because if you knew him, he was, you wouldn't even notice him in the barn. So you wouldn't say that and the fact that he was conformationally challenged. I have a theory with the roach back. What they did was they tried the chiropractic work, and then I have a theory that probably he was afraid that you would touch his back. So when you moved the line, you were going to touch him. It was almost probably, he had to have some kind of incredible will. That was what would change him, and he would do it easily. But I would think that there's an element of when Tom Brady, when the ball gets handed to him, he just instinctively and easily knows what to do, and that's what Muscle Hill did. But could he have been ruined? Oh, absolutely. Like even when he was warming up in Lexington as a 2-year-old, I can remember Tom Pontone out watching him because the media and they had a partner at the time that said he was lame and this and that, because he would have antics when he would warm up. But everybody seems to forget about that. And funny, I said to Elizabeth Caldwell the other day, who's an extraordinary horsewoman and partners with one of my best friends, Mitchell Skolnick, who has Bluestone Farms and bred. Well, we could be sitting here for a while, Propulsion among others, with Mitchell and Elizabeth. I said to Elizabeth, do me a favor, will you thank me for what I did with Muscle Hill? Why? I said, you'll be the first. Yeah, it's a funny thing. I've seen articles written about him. What's the woman from Nova Scotia wrote an article about him in his stud career and never mentioned me? You'd say, how the heck could that be? Nah. Well, they'd say, well, you didn't do anything in the stallion career. Talk about the stallion career. Do you know this? I can't go to Southwind to see him. What? Yeah, the farm manager at the time, I left Mitchell's one day in a little maroon BMW at Father's Day. And Christy, my significant other, Marcos and I and Brendan went over, and to see him, snapped a picture, asked the Latino guy that was there, you know what, mate? He said, oh, yeah, I know who you are. Yeah, you train the horse. Snapped a picture. Then we get a call that she said I was there with a truck and trailer going to pick him up. And Mitchell said, well, you just left here in a little maroon BMW. So to this day, I can't go to Southwind to see the horse. That, I would think, is pretty sad. And again, I think by the way you're talking, as I say, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll testify under oath with a polygraph test, and being not a staunch Catholic like my mother, the real amazing Grace Peck. If we say something like that, we do report to a higher power. That's not something I would tell you publicly if it was not in every facet true. So,
let's do this. Let's do this. I don't want to cut you off or anything. You're a communications specialist, and we're going to delve into your history and what have you. But let's go back. You said the magic word, Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. If Muscle Hill was the greatest trotter and now possibly stud in the industry, who would you consider the greatest stud on the pacer side? Because there's the old saying, there's trotting men and there's pacing boys.
Well, but I don't know necessarily about that. I pride myself in this. Okay, Lone Ranger came to me, and he was a pacer, supposedly knew Bolton Cornell, said he had heart trouble, would never race again. He was brought back to Preddy's. They didn't move because you got to know Bob Marks, who's another one of my confidants. They don't move horses, like especially around. Cut a long story short, I won the Messenger. It was historic. It was the first Triple Crown race raced at the Empire City Casino at Yonkers. That's after they'd done the renovation. So that was a pacer. Lady Matt Blaine was a pacer. Fly Like an Eagle was a pacer. I go on for a while. And then the trotters, Well, you know, you do have Muscle Hill and Holiday Road, which in those days was the biggest day in history for trotting because, you know, in that day, Muscle Hill, the Hamiltonian was what, $1,533,333, and then you had the Peter Houghton, and they went for more money then. So, but getting to your question about Pacers, here's the irony. The two super horses of our generation made super sires, Muscle Hill and Some Beach Somewhere. And here's the other thing. They were back-to-back years, and I'm from Sydney Mines, Nova Scotia, and Brent McGrath is from Truro, Nova Scotia, 3 hours away. Now, as an old-time horseman years ago, James Roach McGregor said, looking out over the Hillsborough River in Prince Edward Island, which is the Maritimes, he said, you know, when it comes to harness racing, it's not the end of the world, but you can see it from here. So again, for Brent and I to do that, but I noticed there's a lot of books around Some Beach Somewhere, and with Brent, you know, they include him in everything, where I'm excluded lots. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. So you almost start to think, well, it's like the election results. Around here, I can tell you one thing. I'll tell you a funny thing. I poll them, rich, poor, African-American, white, Hispanic, employed, unemployed, every walk of life, and I can't find anybody who says they voted for Joe Biden. And I'm going to tell you what, everybody loves a winner. And you would think, and by the way, I sat, when I did the Republican training, I sat on the train actually with Joe Biden from Washington, D.C. to Wilmington, Delaware, and a wonderful guy. But my point is this, you start to believe in the conspiracy theories, because you're talking to a guy, I would never have thought, I mean, we're naive to all that, but you start to say, well, is there some kind of conspiracy that they really try not to mention my name with that horse? And I think there is an element that it was such an anomaly, if you will. As a matter of fact, when I was in Macon, I said to my boys, you know, this place was built for Greyhound. And 80 years later, they talk about maybe in 80 years, they'll say, your dear old dad purchased, yeah, it's right there, Gregory Peck, Newtown, PA, managed, trained, got the results, came on be the great stallion, with a horse called Muscle Hill who could fall down, get up, and beat Greyhound. So maybe down the road they'll mention me eventually. I guess, I don't know. It's kind of fun, and I say it with humility.
Well, you better get up now, as Roger says, because there was a gentleman by the name of Francis Bellevaux, and he worked with a gentleman by the name...
Sealster, that's right.
You know exactly where I'm going with this, but you don't know the angle.
By the way,
let me finish now.
The bear was brought in full to Warm Breeze, so he wasn't even bred by Sealster. They named him Sealster, and the irony of that, and I'll say this here because, you know, I've had some unkind dealings with them, and I don't know why, because I was very good at the industry. But Falcon Sealster, all these years later, would be the best horse that they ever bred.
Let me get to the story, Greg.
Sure, they didn't breed him. Actually, they named him Chris, who was a wonderful gentleman, according to Bob Burgess, who died recently, who was close to me. He said that Chris was a great guy, but they bought the mare in full and named him Falcon.
I love Blair, and every time he puts something on social media, I always back him up and say, well said. But let's continue with the story.
With Blair, by the way, I'm going to say this too.
Let's continue with the story.
I wish I had had a father like Bob, who put pegboard stalls, and I shouldn't say it that way, to put 20 yearlings in front of me for all those years. That man really, he should be in, Bob should be in a couple of Hall of Fames. He's in one, but he should be in two, because I can tell you again, if he had not been around, it's kind of like I'll say, everything had to happen for a reason. Another Mitchell Skolnick. And I can tell you right now, if Blair did not have that man, we would not be talking about Blair Burgess. Say, well, maybe if he had to do it on his own, but again, it'd be like me talking. If I had to, gaveled Muscle Hill, well, everything had to happen, or we could argue it would never have happened. So I just want to get the record straight, because Bob Burgess died. Heather, we still talk to, and I think that Bob died and was not understood and appreciated like he should have been.
So back to what I was trying to get to. Mr. Bellevaux worked with a gentleman by the name of the Beast.
Yvon Cormier.
Correct. So are you familiar with the story with him coming to the States? Do you know the real?
Yeah, when he went to Pompano and then had to work the Charlie Day Bottom, Sierra Stable in Pompano, and around the time after that he bought Peoples and Perfect Blue Chip. The Beast, remember, trained and drove when he had brothers that wrestled. He had Leo Burke, Rudy Kay, and who was the other one? Yeah, there was another brother, Leo Burke. Because Leo was kind of, we'll say, the Hulk Hogan of the day, and then the Beast, was really something. And I can remember seeing the Beast when I was down at the Gold Cup and Saucer, of which I won, the 2 trials that year. And speaking, but I've known the Beast for years, and he was
that's
he's
not
a legend
the angle we're trying to get at,
Greg. Sure. And so was Falcon Sealster, by the way, with Francis Bello, absolutely.
So, do you know the story and who picked out Falcon Sealster as a yearling? You seem to know everything else.
Well, you know what? I probably do, but, at 57, well, maybe my memory's not quite as good, so I think you should tell me.
Well, you're talking to his son. My father picked out Falcon Sealster as a yearling with Tommy Harmer. Now, we were told certain things were wrong with the horse.
Say what with Tommy Harmer?
Tommy Harmer was basically acting as an agent and came to Chicago.
Yeah, but Tommy Harmer was another good one. When Muscle Hill and Pelone Ranger went to the American National, and Pelone Ranger won the free-for-all, Tom Harmer called me, and that's really when he was very good to me, Tom Harmer. And remember, he's instrumental in building the offset sulky and everything. Now they're lighter, but you got to give Tom, and Tom was a heck of a trainer-driver in his day. So, I haven't heard
the Golden Boy
say that he's not doing as well, but there's a guy I have time for any time, Tom Harmer.
So let's go back to Nova Scotia. Let's talk about your roots. We're about 15, 16 minutes into this conversation already. We like to start out with basically the history.
George Jones would go on stage and say, if you keep like this, I'll play all night long. But he'd only go an hour, but he would tell him he'd go all night.
So, what were your roots to the industry? Are you first generation? Are you multi-generational?
Third. Remember, we had 70 years in the grocery business. It was called Peck's FNS, and in the day, he would deliver grocery orders with horse and wagon. And my father and uncles, one being Dr. Joseph Peck, as I said, and a shout-out to Les Miller. Oh, yeah, the Les, is a guy who at Balmoral for years and helped people out, and an ex-Amish person. And by the way, another shout-out to the Amish, because what will we've done without them in this industry? And my daily conversation is Chris Coyle, who was the hotelier to the Stars at Olive Branch Farm in North Carolina, with such Amish people as Alan Byler in Mumfordville, Kentucky, who's really done well commercially with mares. I talked to Dean Miller, who has Ole Yoder, who's buying all facets of the industry. So, there's just so much of how the industry has changed, but getting back to, so I had my roots with the horse and wagon. That's probably why I get along well with the Amish, because my uncle, by the way, Jerry, as you guys know, Doc, as they would call him, loved to go on Saturdays down to Marvin Miller's, Irvin and Andy's father, and obviously TJ's, is Tyler's grandfather, and go with horse and wagon in for coffee with Marvin. Yeah, he was more interested, and then by the way, but he was more interested, and then Les and my Aunt Jan and my uncle would go to the most prestigious country club in the Chicagoland area, as you know, in Park Ridge. So it was a funny
10-minute drive down the street.
How that all worked out.
10-minute drive down the street at Washington and Sylvie. I know exactly where that place is. So again,
and here's what they would do on the day too. They would race the horses on the ice, with the corks on their shoes. Oh yeah, that was a big thing. So I've heard that about me too. That he's a motivational speaker. Well, no, I'm not that. I was lucky. Sackville Downs closed, and I went and had a thirst to do something else. And my brother-in-law, Barry McLaughlin, he quenched that thirst of learning, and it continues today, because Barry McLaughlin really took me and made me a man, to the point, about all this whole HISA and all that. I said to John Campbell the other day, I'll never dispute John Campbell's accomplishment of being at or near the top for 5 generations. I don't know of anybody else in any sport who did that. Gordie Howe might have played in so many decades, but he was not at or near the top. But with John Campbell, I said to him the other day, he said to me, well, what about you? You had no executive experience, because I suggested to him that going forward that, you need to have a quest for knowledge. And a guy like that could really help us if he had that thirst for knowledge to get upgraded in an executive capacity like I had to do, or any other business. Because, if you look at this, remember the whole communications that's been done around the HISA, the whips and this and that, really, we're communicating to ourselves. Well, we've already convinced ourselves, even though they haven't convinced me. I was one of, what did they have, 200 that said they supported HISA, one of which is me, and I said to Steve Stewart, who I love very much, we're almost like brothers, as I tease a fellow Catholics, and I said, you must have been really desperate to put my name on there, because I'm kind of persona non grata, even though the other day I go to Freehold, and Richard O'Donnell says to me, I notice every year you check the box, he had a positive test. Well, I said, well, I did. I said I was very vocal about it with Lone Ranger when they started to saying they were going to test, for Winstrol. I won't use the generic name because people will know better by Winstrol, which was a prescription after Ben Johnson tested positive at the World Championship at that. So when Lone Ranger had made $1 million, after I'd taken him out, all of the ridiculous, misprescribed, medications and gave him his Winstrol, and he went on and won $1 million later. Right, he came up with an overage when I thought, well, they're going to go after the cocktails. They won't say 5 ml per 1,000 pounds, which has been approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. They're not. No, they did. So I said to Richard O'Donnell, by the way, how Lone Ranger ended up at Balmoral when I went with Muscle, I called Balmoral, disclosed why I want to go there, and said, are you testing for steroids? And they said, no. So Lone Ranger won the free-for-all. I never raced him again and sold him as a stallion in Indiana because it wouldn't be fair to him. Okay? So, some of the things that we're getting into, we're saying things that make no sense at all. And I wish everybody would kind of do what I did with Barry, have a thirst for knowledge and be on a steep learning curve all day, every day. We'd really live in a wonderful world of harness racing if everybody did that. Because, again, we're just saying things, as my Harvard-educated buddy, again, because I'm not Harvard-educated, with St. Mary's University, well, I talk about that. I walked through there on the way to Sackville Downs there for a year. So that's about what I did. And I readily admit, but I have to, Joe Whalen used to say, Greg, there's just some things that people say, and the rhetoric that they use to describe their opinions, the rhetoric, it's quite something. So funny how we've segued, Eric, from a third-generation horseman to being a first-generation communication/media consultant, for everybody from the Clinton administration right up until the Trump administration, but not Trump, obviously. But in harness racing, I think they would rather do it wrong than take my advice. Yeah, they'd rather, because again, they're really, as Joe Whalen said, they're breaking themselves into jail. They keep, we were criticized for years that the trotters held them back, that we didn't try hard enough. Here we are bringing it up all day, every day about the drugs and the whips. Yeah, again, I wish they'd focus on getting people to the races. We're really not a brand anyway. Nobody knows. We're in a good position. They don't even know who we are. So we're in a heck of a position. And as they say, so why don't we, first generation, let's start over again in harness racing, rebrand it, make it something else. Like, remember the Beast? That's right. You had the Beast in the Atlanta Grand Prix wrestling or international wrestling, but that's now Conor McGregor. Yeah, it's evolved in several ways. So, if they could do it, then maybe we might consider the same thing.
So, again, we have a format we try to follow. We're now almost 25 minutes into the conversation. We're not following it. But you talk about being a communications specialist.
Because again, I listen. Even I hear that from a lot of in the industry about the policies. And I tell them, well, even the president has veto power, or bills get held up. People do change their mind when something else better comes along. Well, so don't be insulted. You might have to slightly alter your format. I know I've taught people to go on 60 Minutes and Connie Chung in the day, and then I can tell you, Connie Chung went into interviews thinking one thing, but came out on the other side with something better. So you might want to think about that yourself.
Well, I mean, we run our format here, and I'd like to stick to it because we're going to be short for time at the end, where I'd like to hear some of your opinions on what's going on in the industry. But let's talk briefly about Nicole Wallace, being a communications specialist.
Well, Nicole was Nicole Devonish, and how that happened was I auditioned in New Orleans, one of 3 companies. Remember, I wasn't politically connected. You would think who's going to train the politicians across the country for speeches, debates, campaign calls, whatever, would be somebody who was politically connected, like a New York or a Washington PR company. So they auditioned a few, but I think what they liked about me is I didn't just tell them to bridge to positive point. If you notice what I do with you, I acknowledge and validate what you ask me, but then I move over to what I would deem to be much more interesting to your listenership. You know, because really I'm communicating via you to the audience. I'm confident will say, yeah, that's what we wanted to hear here. So if I just simply answered your questions, it would make for a pretty boring interview, because how do I know that you're going to come up with the right questions? So it's interesting about that. So Nicole and company hired me to go across the country, and I did little things like I was proud of, talk about debating, because I get into this all the time. People, they want to debate. And here's what they do with me. They do the ad hominem argument. In other words, they argue with me in irrelevancy, whether it was John the other day on the phone said, well, you're not Kurt, or whatever. All I know is this, what Nicole and them saw is that I could really move them and advance them forward, and then hired me. And, it was kind of an interesting thing, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I'm pretty proud of that. But I'll give you an example of what we did do. I had a candidate called John Sanchez in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, running against Bill Richardson, who was Secretary of Energy at the time. And John Sanchez, the White House had put a lot of money into him because he was, going to be the Latino Hispanic poster boy. But he was, but he wasn't fluent in Spanish. Yeah, and a roofer. But I'll tell you what, I set him up. He won the debate over Bill Richardson. So talk about a long shot. Yeah, that was the antithesis of Muscle Hill. John would be as long a shot as ever, and he won the debate. But obviously, he didn't win the election. But that's maybe the brilliance of a Nicole Wallace, etc., that they thought I was different and I knew what to do, when they didn't judge me based on kind of like what my own industry does. They bring up irrelevancies, really.
So the question next is, where'd you hear about the Horseman's Voice?
Well, I heard about it. I saw it, and I thought you did a wonderful job in bringing out Jeff Corral. Because remember, Jeff Corral.
Well, we're talking now back in the.
Hold on. Business. You watch him walk around. You see Jeff and Paula, his wife, walking around at Vernon, maybe with a knee brace on or something. But just is so passionate about it. You know what I say to Jeff? The only thing I don't like about him is, what if something ever happens to him? Now what do we do? Yeah, that would be a very sad day for harness racing, because that man, if he never does another thing, and they fight with him all the time, but he saved the Meadowlands. I can tell you, I know Chris Christie, as you can tell now. Yeah, I had some dealings with him because of my training experience. If Jeff Corral had not come along, we were not that important. Believe me, the Meadowlands would have closed. So that man never does another thing, and I'm not going to debate the semantics of how much and what it costs and what he's doing now and the gaming and the sports wagering. All I know, if he hadn't come along, there'd be no Meadowlands today.
Well, we're not talking the present day. I'm talking back in the day, like we first met in 2009. The publication was started in 2003 after Standardbred Canada, your home country, re-edited a piece on taser gun, and it drove me to start this publication. So
I can remember
back in the day,
leave the gate and everything, yeah.
Back in the day, when was the first exposure that you had? Was it in that 6 months in the beginning? Was it later on?
The Horseman's Voice, you mean?
Yeah, back in the day.
No, I never knew about it till probably when you were on the Harness Racing alumni show. That's where, and then I took it upon myself Frankly, here's what I thought.
Well, we
At
met
first I thought,
we met in
here was my first
2009,
reaction.
Greg.
Why this guy? It can't be interesting. He's in Illinois. Then I realized, wait, no, this is very interesting. Yeah, it's a selfless type of thing where you talk to people that aren't necessarily famous, and it's not the same one every time like we seem to do. So it's not, who's ever in vogue at the top. No, it draws something. So it was Jeff Corral. You really drew him out well about his passion. You didn't talk about him how, with his real estate holdings, or, him talking about being on CNBC about, having a higher tax for the wealthy. No, you talked about the passion that he's put into the industry, which, again, and I said this to him on the phone, if you took the Meadowlands and Muscle Hill out of the industry, what would you have left?
Well, what I'm getting at is, Greg, we met in 2009, if your memory doesn't remind you here. So you knew about the Horseman's Voice back then. That's what I'm trying to say. Where did you
Well,
first...
you might have told me what it was, but I did so many, and I apologize, Eric, for not remembering. But here's what I know about you. You could interview in any genre.
Yes, sir.
You're a very good interviewer, and that's why I said if you track well, I'm trying to get you to track even better. In other words, what happens, I taught interviewing. What you do, you go into an interview with a general set of questions, but where a masterful interview does is if something else better comes along, which hopefully that give you mine and flesh that out, and you kind of leave your agenda, because, again, I've trained executives, you planned something, and they had that's why people say, well, send me your questions. No, it doesn't matter what you answer. You should go on there, and that's what our industry is doing. They're communicating to themselves. Yeah, if you got the average person on the street and they listen to what they said about, the drugs and the whips, I'll give you an example. I want to flesh something else out here. Now, and I get you about your format. Joe Bongiorno is really a good kid and a wonderful driver with a future. He really, I take pride in discovering him in a way. I shouldn't say that, but after my bad Hamiltonian on Holiday Road, who would have won the Hamiltonian, went into it the favorite, got loose the tension bar, got hurt, and that was the end of him. So I put him on for qualifying drives, and the irony was he drove one for me that was a rock and roll Hanover that I thought was dangerous. Lucky that he didn't fall. And I said, when I watched that kid, that's the end of that horse. So the other night, the kid, you'd think they'd be saying, God bless him, is he okay? Is he well? Yeah, he didn't get hurt. No. They're trying to say, well, he did this and he did that. Really what they're looking to do is have all these rules. And at first I thought, well, maybe he should. No, you'd be taking away his artistic freedom. I will bet you this, if you had my kids go to the races, one Sean, say, who's going to be a decorated hero in the city of Philadelphia, by the Democratic mayor there for what he did as a policeman. Brendan, Brendan is very influenced by Clay Horner, who, again, if Clay Horner had to save Ontario racing, the Pontones, who were the major owners in Muscle Hill, they would have had to build a casket the size of Ontario. It would be dead without Clay Harlan Horner being able to leverage that property in Rexdale to save harness racing in Ontario, literally. Okay, with that being said, you just say to yourself, what are they doing?
Well, I'm trying to figure out where this conversation's going, Greg.
I don't know what.
I'm trying to figure out where this conversation's going. You got in
so
touch
am
with
I,
me.
in a way, because you got me wound up, and I didn't want to prepare. I didn't want to go in and say, well, I'll be message-driven, not question-driven, and I'll state, support, and illustrate racing. Well, that would be kind of boring, really, so I decided to go in it in reactive mode, not in proactive mode, so you're drawing me out and getting the real me, not going in with planned, prepared messages. No. So the Joe Bongiorno was where I was going. There's an example there. They should embrace that young man. There's an example, boy, in an industry where they say they hold them back, don't try it. That's why what they said about try. There's a guy there, when they bet on him, and if you took the Sean and Brendans to the races, my kids, they would really enjoy watching Joe Bongiorno there. Okay, so, but what they were going to do, they really didn't care that he near got killed. And they said stuff like the horse didn't have an overcheck on. He did. Okay, and I said this. They said, well, if they enforced the whip rules, I'm going to tell you right now, whether it was a whipless driver or Joe Bongiorno or any driver, it was John Campbell in the day, or if you brought Walter Case back, who they say would loose line him, and he didn't. Walter Case was ahead of his time, a wonderful driver. That horse might have fallen, okay? And here's the other thing, and I know that's not the case. Maybe if that horse had been able to have his cortisone and have his joints injected, he might be sounder and have a longer career. But we can't do that because we want to go with the thoroughbred industry and say no steroids, no cortisone, and no LASIK. So that's what, you're getting me into areas I think are much more interesting what you and I maybe started out with.
Well, they're calling me the Larry King Live of harness racing, and like I said,
that's a good way of putting it. I used to love it.
We try to keep
to. Do you think that Larry King went on with Ross Perot and it didn't know well when Ross Perot kept saying to Al Gore, "You let me finish. You let me finish. Yeah, you got me done."
Well, this is going to be broadcast. This is going to be broadcast worldwide.
No.
This is going to be broadcast worldwide, and I don't have a problem with you, talking over me. We're sitting on a conversation with.
Well, they wouldn't quite characterize it that way.
Well, let me
finish.
Do, by the way. Let me finish.
Social media will say this. Well, he talked too much, or he talked over the guy, or he did this, or he's crazy. Well, a buddy of mine, Darnell Ivory, said to me the other day, we were dialing with very insightful words. He said, they think you're crazy. Well, you were crazy, but now you're okay, and they're going to have a problem with that. Well, so do me a favor, and I'll give it to them. So when they take me on the ad hominem argument and say, well, he didn't answer the questions, which I did. I addressed them, but moved a message. I teach that, and that's what Nicole Devonish / Wallace like. I didn't tell them just to say positive points, which, by the way, basically what they do on the shows now, including the alumni show, and I like Freddie Trade Bob very much, they get on there and they cheerlead pretty well and say, and if I say, well, they say you're negative. No, I'm realistic and factual. So, I just wanted to pick you up on that. So for all those lists, when they try to say, well, that's irrelevant. Is he talking about stuff that we should be aware of and is willing, as he did with Jack Chattarelli, who just won the Republican nomination, if I'm good enough to turn his campaign around, maybe I could help harness racing a little bit, maybe.
Well, for those that are listening worldwide, we're approaching 38 minutes. I have given Mr. Peck all the time in the world. The reason why he called was to discuss the legislation that, on the record, I don't formally say that I support, but I had a conversation with a very highly regarded person in the industry. He knows who he is. He has audio from back in the day at Arlington Park. I'm actually sitting.
That person? Can you disclose that?
I can't disclose that. I'm sitting on a conversation that is going to be released.
I said to Freddie the other day about the interview with John Campbell, if I could be under embargo with the White House where they would release stuff, I think I've been privy, and I can tell you right now, you haven't spoken to anybody at that level that you couldn't disclose publicly and probably make it interesting. But hey, that's up to you. You can do what you want on that.
Well, are you aware that I'm a White House wrangler since 2009 when we met?
No, I did not know.
Well, now you know, sir. 3 administrations. So let's cut to the chase. You got in touch with me in reference to the HISA bill that was put.
HISA because it's a
HISA,
four-letter acronym.
Horse Racing Integrity Safety Act.
Horse racing integrity. It's not horse racing integrity. So we better get that right. HISA, and by the way, we shouldn't even say HISA because it has no brand recognition outside of us. Do you think the guy that's on his way in the car with his wife to Bristol Myers Squibb to drop her off to work in Trenton, if you said HISA, they'd say, huh? Now, they might know, because I worked on that, S.O. or so, Sarbanes-Oxley, which governs, Wall Street. Well, that they might know. I don't think they know HISA, though. So, you might want to flesh that one out, because I usually teach no FLAs, four-letter acronyms. People don't know what it is.
So, I'm going to just simply give you the floor. We're not going to follow the format.
No. Now ask me the question. I want you to ask me the question.
Well, you don't like the format. You don't like the questions. So
I love the format. What are you talking about? You did
we haven't done anything here, Greg, with the format.
We were so good. We went overtime. This is the greatest interview that I've done in years, and you really, really captured me and brought me out. So
Well,
now, here's what I want to do.
is it the coffee? Is your dog with you? Let's talk about your dog.
No, I wish Gracie was here because Gracie really, I always wanted a girl, and I say that if they wouldn't have to do a DNA test, she looks just like me and everything. Gracie Kelly Peck, the mini dash-hound, and her brother Pablo. And Pablo is like Sean, he's a protector, you know, and Gracie is more enthusiastic, like Brett, put it that way. But here's what I'd like for you to do. No, I want you to do this. Ask me several questions, and we'll end on that, and I promise, because I've said what I've had to say, and I promise I'll answer them. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, let's talk about your dog. You know, I was involved with full-bred boxers as a kid. We had 3 litters, and I learned at a young age how to instill, if I can use this word, power and knowledge into these little dogs. And then I was introduced to horses slowly.
Yeah.
And we bred a horse that became a champion, let alone my father picking out Falcon Sealster as a yearling and actually taking horse B instead of Falcon Sealster, and look what he became. So
well, that happened,
do you feel that, like, I don't know how to say this, but
I get a better story, by the way.
You can instill.
They have the wiener dog races. Speaking of the mini dog, you know Myron Bell is. Yeah, I know you do. But Myron Bell's been a wonderful friend of me for years, and my uncle before the Bernie, Brendan Peck, who looked after Keystone Pioneer and Meadowell, the 2 best horses out known to peace. So we're in Lexington, and Tony Alania's warming up, and Tony has been a very trusted and loyal friend to me for years. He really has, before he was famous. Tony, you got to know Tony. Steve Stewart said there's nobody easy to get along with Tony, and that's probably true. But anyway, so Tony is warming up, and I run downstairs to get Stephanie Bell and John Padera's wife. John's a wonderful Barbara, and the woman that was working the racing commission drinks because there's a big lineup, and I come back because they had the wiener dog races. They had a bigger crowd than they would think of having at the Grand Circuit. This was before Grand Circuit. So I get back up, and Myron was very upset over the wiener dogs. Tony couldn't warm up in the mile track. I can tell you right now, Tony won't mind, but one thing led to another. And Myron, as you know, we get into an awful set to, and till this day, he's kind of mad at me when I said to Myron, the wiener dogs, they drew more to the Red Mile than Muscle Hill did on Futurity Day. So, you know, that's another thing we do. You know, we need to cross-market stuff like that because they're not going to come. We're not branded. They don't even know. They'll just see a bunch of horses running around a circle. But everybody's got a dog.
So do you feel with animals in general, let alone Muscle Hill and the other progeny that you've brought up over the years, that you instill your knowledge and power, if I can use that word once again, into these animals?
I kind of get a sense of them, which is, you know, disabling, or I should say, to my crew. Like I remember Sylvia Hovda, who took care of Muscle Hill and started with me in the early days. We ramped up before we had much. You know, when we got more, she became the in-house manager / second trainer, and she'd say to me, you got to put the board up. Oh, really? In other words, the training plan, because I'd come in the morning, I really don't know what I'm going to do until I get to the track, and it's a problem because I'm very an instinct type of trainer, and that's what's helped me, because I think if you ask people to truly look at me, do you know how many horses going back to the claiming days, etc., that I picked up that were basically about not dead on arrival, but pretty close to it, and brought them back and made them better than they ever were. And I don't know why, because getting back to the Richard O'Donnell story of earlier, Clone Ranger got a warning, not a positive test. And I said to Richard O'Donnell, with that being said, you know, no wonder I don't get any horses, because they want you to have 3 or 4 positive tests now. So I did that all without positive tests. I might have had an overage on GastroGuard and then the Winstraw, but nothing, no. So that's the way I train horses. I kind of, and I was never a dog guy, because my father used to say this. It's true. Muscle Hill would be out training, and Svedshammer's dog might run across the track at him. And you know what my father would say? Well, he was at the Greyhound races, which are kind of extinct now, but in the day, I went to the Greyhound races in Florida, but I never saw a horse there. So he didn't want to mix them, but now the dogs have blended in well, that's for sure. But, no, horses were really all I thought about from a very young age, and I would read the Harness Horse and the hoofbeats in the day, and the siren dams go to mass, where you'd have the prayer booklet, and I would underline words like Dad would when he saw a horse, that he knew locally. He would go through the harness horse results and underline them. So, it's been a passion forever, and now I just bought a farm. I'm going to call it the World Trotting Center, where I'll have 47 acres and a 5/8 mile track, and maybe I'll build a wall around it like Donald Trump to keep everybody away from me, because as Nancy, the mother of my children, would say, Greg gets very dysfunctional around dysfunctionality, so maybe we'll build a wall around me.
Well, everybody has their way
of... And not tear it down like they want to do with Donald Trump.
Everybody has the way of doing things. So, let's try to get back to the format which we're not following.
Yeah.
I'm really at a loss for words here, because I have a format that I follow with people, and you've kind of taken over the conversation, and I enable all horse people to do that. I've enjoyed this so far.
It's kind of like I said to John Campbell, which he kind of doesn't get when I pass the lines over to him. Or when Brian Sears, again, Brian Sears, I don't even say hello to him when he drives. Now let him do what he's going to do. Even though I went in with a plan, I knew he might do something a little bit better. So I hope, with respect, Eric, you might think that this worked out to be a pretty good interview that wasn't quite
off
with
the cuff.
format that you want.
It's live. Yeah. It's going to be published. I disclose to you who's in the pipeline besides the one big one that's going to come out. But let's talk about, I guess, your opinion.
Let me ask you this. Wouldn't you say that we went off format? Would you say you got a better than average interview? One of the better ones you've had?
Well, you talked about Jeff Corral and his, I guess, insight in the industry.
That's not what I asked you. Now I'm going to go into the media training. Would you say that what we've done in because I said I was going to take 10 minutes. Wouldn't you say? Do you think that what we did maybe was a pretty good piece of work? Well, better than average, say.
Let's say, Jeff Corral wants to talk breeding. Well, I've got Rashawn Trigg, and I want to have them on together.
But hang on, no. So what you're saying is no, then this has not been a good interview.
No, it's a great interview, but what I'm getting at is... Well,
there you go. See, that's what you have to do in media training. I got you to say it is a great... Because, again, here's what I'm saying is...
This isn't media training.
Jealous ones out there that will say, see, he didn't do the format, but he judged me based on the issue at hand, not again in an Hodman manner that says, well, you didn't have you only had one good horse. And let's say they're right, which they aren't. Yeah, but that's what you call the ad hominem argument. It's not the issue. I think you brought me out to do the greatest interview I've ever done. I should say, I almost got a grammatical error there. And I walked into it not knowing, and I thank you for that. You really have drawn me out. And I'm still waiting. You asked me a few questions. But
I'm ready, and I have nothing in front of me.
Go ahead, then.
Let me ask you some off-the-record questions on the record.
Yeah,
are you familiar?
On and for the record, unless you're at the White House, which we sometimes would put stuff under embargo and leak it to see, what they be feeling out there, and then we release something. But I'll do it anyway.
Are you familiar with CONA? Do you know what CONA stands for, the acronym?
The what?
CONA.
No, the FLA, CONA, no.
Okay, so CONA is the Carriage Operators of North America. Are you familiar with a gentleman by the name of Johnny Smith?
No, but the carriage operators I'd like, because I like the show horse world, and I used to show them in roadster classes when I was a kid. But anyway, I'm listening.
So let's drop some names here. I was invited out to Nashville, Tennessee. You like country music, and I was
Anything you want to know about country music, you talk to me.
I was able to meet
ExxonMobil in the day. They say, how the heck does this guy from Nova Scotia now transplant New York, Philadelphia, the suit on, know about George Jones, Merle Haggard, Buck Owens, etc., and no, give me the opening lyric, and he'll tell you the song. So Nashville is my kind of town.
So let's stick to the questions. So I was invited out by Tina Doherty, and I was able to stay at Sugar Creek Carriages. I was able to see how Johnny does his operation.
Her. She's a friend of mine on Facebook. Yes, I've seen.
So anybody, I'm going to give a shout out to everybody out in Nashville. You guys will see me when the Big OG opens up.
Was Tina married to one of Jimmy's?
Yes.
Yeah, Jimmy Doherty and I were very good friends, and Jimmy Doherty, Brendan, my son, was probably 7 at the time. He flew from Lexington back to with Mr. Doherty, and they were friends ever since.
So, she introduced me to Johnny, and Johnny runs Sugar Creek Carriages in Macoupin, Tennessee. And I'll tell you, I was there, I lived there for a few days. I want to go back. I want to live how they live out there and just see these horses every morning. So the bottom line comes down to HISA, as you say it. What are your HISA, whatever you want to call it.
Integrity, it's integrity.
What do you?
And Freddie said to me, well, even Mitch McConnell calls it HISA. Well, I said, I think that tells you how high that it is in his totem pole. He doesn't even pronounce the acronym right.
So
I don't think Mitch sits around worried about his. I don't think so. I worked with him in his office. Maybe he does. I don't know.
The bill was
but I doubt it, though.
passed in the omnibus bill by President Trump. I actually went to a local public meeting.
Yeah, there's what they call pork barrel. And go ahead. Yeah.
So I went to a local public meeting and gave a shout out to Mitch McConnell. So what are your thoughts and feelings and, I guess, opinions moving forward with this, which is going to be very different from what other people think? Like, I'll give you the floor again. Just take it and run.
Well, no. First of all, again, if I walked into, for instance, I did a lot of work for the American Society of Association Executives, which is basically the trade association of trade associations, where I taught a program every year at the University of Maryland, College Park. So I'd have to know more about the legislation. Let's say, when we talked about it, a post-Katrina environment, what had to happen in the Gulf was I did a lot of work for Enbridge, say, with the pipelines. Well, you had to not only clean up with the rules and regulations, you needed new legislation to advance, new infrastructure so you could get the energy where it was needed close to the consumer. So, but I'd have to go in knowing more about, so the same with HISA, that there's so many question marks. And by the way, here's the funny thing. They think I follow the thoroughbreds, yeah? Well, I love the thoroughbreds. I own them. I follow them. But I wouldn't follow them over the cliff either, because look at the whole Bob Baffert thing. And by the way, Bob Baffert, I've been to the Derby with him since real quiet. I trained his veterinarian at Santa Anita, Dr. Vince Baker, who, by the way, was the veterinarian for Ross Krogan in the day and that. And Ross was very good friends and would drink with Vince's son, Dr. Bart Baker. We share stories. And Bob, who I talked to, basically I told him this. If you took Exxon Valdez and the BP spill where the guy said he wanted, but he couldn't communicate it worse because the lawyers have dominated. So I hear them talking about, we talked to some guy in Washington. Well, that's one aspect of it, but don't let the lawyers dominate, or don't let one group dominate. So now we're saying, okay, because the thoroughbreds, no. Could Bob Baffert, who is a good guy, I consider him a friend, but he listened to the lawyers. I can show you the texts. What I said to him, it's really ridiculous what's happened. So if they think that in this form, just do what the thoroughbreds are going to, by the way, you know what it is? Why then, if Lasix is so bad, did the great Aidan O'Brien, he raced them on Lasix. And I can tell you this, and this I want to put up. Lasix, I used to take them out, but if they bleed, they should have Lasix. The problem is it's over-prescribed. Now, on the baking soda, Jeff told me the other day, and maybe he's right, that he says the levels, that they give them the positive test are high anyway. Because I said to this, I drive by the Arm & Hammer Stadium every day in Trenton and say, you know what? If they let everybody use 8 ounces of baking soda, and you told people if you run track or you run distance, like my son Sean at 14 running the Philadelphia Marathon, which I'm very proud of, And by the way, a shout out to my wonderful granddaughter Layla and Sean's wonderful wife Janet and Jay. Thank God for them. Anyway, if your legs didn't burn, we can all agree that the baking soda picks them up 2 seconds. What would the black market, where we're investigating, with the, now with the FBI, and what would they do if everybody was the same? Because what they do is come up with something that's 2 seconds faster that they can't test for. So I would say this, but it's never going that way, because the thoroughbreds say, we can't sell our yearlings. So so they sell for 1.8 million instead of 2. They're still doing pretty well. But that's the problem, with this whole, and they're talking the therapeutic levels. Here's the other, so that brings me to the cortisone, the third thing. The steroids, the baking soda, and the corticosteroids. If Medina Spirit was able to have his joints injected and not talk BS about, well, first he didn't have it, now it's they want to prove that was an anointment, which again is an ad hominem argument that it wasn't injected in his joints. He should be able to have his cortisone. It shouldn't be an overage. It shouldn't be a positive test because it's in the best interest of the health and welfare of the horse. It really is. And by the way, if you look at, and I sent you a picture that the American Association of Big Clinical Practitioners, yeah, they hired me, and I trained from Dr. Patty Hogan to Dr. Steve Dye. When they saw me at the Kentucky Derby in 1998 with Vince Baker and Bob Baffert, either that it was a coincidence, they fired me abruptly. Well, because they didn't want, again, people are so intimidated by knowledge, where I want to find a guy, like you just said you did, these people who know are smarter than I am in a certain, and I want to embrace it and watch it happen. About like I've seen Warren Buffett say that he wants to find businesses and just enjoy watching. Clay Horner would be very much like that. Clay Horner just loves watching people who know what they're doing and does not in any way get in their way. It's like a good horse. That's probably what we did with Muscle Hill. Is I knew, let's not get in his way. Let's prepare him for, I remember in the Canadian Trotting Classic, Andy Miller's horse just slowed down a little bit abruptly. Any other horse would have gone right over the top and made it break. Muscle Hill didn't. So, again, we're on topic, but then again, we're off topic, but I think that's what makes it interesting, and you really draw me out.
Well,
So give me a question. I don't know.
I've been trying to the whole interview. Come on, Greg.
Who's the greatest driver? Who was this? Who was that?
I'm trying, but we're at 56 minutes. We've got basically 3.5 more minutes.
So we're only doing an hour. That's it. We might have to do it in 2 parts.
Well, we can come back and we can talk breeding, like I do want to do with Jeff Corral and Rashawn Trigg.
I know a lot about that.
So, when's your birthday? You said you're 57 years old.
May the 25th, 64. So I'm Gemini, and I said, well, not a split person. That's why I could do the media training and train the horses.
Both my sisters
really
are Gemini.
Didn't do anything. The horse did the work, and the media. Wow. Well, I was surrounded by the Rex Tillersons of the world. They should have really paid me to get an education from them, not the other way around.
Well, I have 2 sisters that are both Geminis, and what I've learned with Geminis, we have a few trustees that are Geminis here in Morton Grove. They're tremendous management organizers. Would you consider yourself that with horses?
Well, I tell you what I am, a tremendous manager and a tremendous leader, but I immobilized everybody around me because I taught a course, I gave a speech at the Atlantic Healthcare Congress in Atlantic City, and who spoke right after me was the late Tommy Lasorda, and we met in the speaker's room. He said, I agree with everything you said, and he was from Norristown, I was from Newtown. He said, I used to say stuff to the media to influence my players all the time, he said. And I'd organize differently, but I said it was to get them to come along and listen to me. I have a real problem with that. And a friend, Ron McDonald, who's a very dear friend of mine in Ontario, said to me, you don't talk like they do. I know you're clear. I know you emphasize, but they're not used to that. And he's about right. So that's the only problem with my management style. I don't do well, even though I embrace, whatever walk of life. I'm like Vince Gill said in his song about his father, the key to life, it's all for nothing if you don't remain the same. So, I'm the same to you or anybody else. And with, so am I a great manager? You know what? If you looked at my truck, you'd say no, but you can't find anybody. Somebody will come along like Molly, who looked after Norby, who looked after Holiday Road. I'd walk in and she'd have my boots in place. She'd even hang the lines with a twist in them. She really let me do what I had to do, and I never forgot about it. I kind of need that again as I ramp up again with my new farm and everything.
Well, we've got a minute and a half here. I have to do my little ending at the end of the show, but let me just ask you, you've mentioned a lot of names. You've name-dropped a lot of people, but...
Well, I wouldn't characterize it that way. You notice the names that I have dropped...
Well, we've got a minute here. We've got a minute here.
It's not like I just don't just mention and say, well, I'm buddies with whoever's at the top now. I don't see that. I mentioned guys like this. Shannon Murphy. Yeah, Murph. Yeah. At Burke's is from the same area that I'm from Glace Bay, and the two of us are not even in the Cape Breton Horseman's Hall of Fame. And Murph, Apples Thomas was probably the most famous second trainer. Murph is in another league. Apples Thomas was with, the Houghton stable.
We're at T-minus 30 seconds,
Greg.
In another We're at T-minus 30
again,
seconds.
And nobody even mentions them. Or Chris Coyle, they talk about, some of the Kentucky colonels and how that they can get a...
So we're going to be ending this episode. Mr. Peck is actually continuing to talk as he drives in to go training. We're almost at an hour. We'd like to thank Mr. Peck for his interview. And you can listen in next week. We're going to have more interviews with the Horseman's Voice. Signing out.